Along these same lines, I think one thing, at least for me, that's been really valuable to learn from you and talking to you about all this is like, and this is playing off of what you're talking about right now. But one of my theories that seemed to make sense to me was like, hey, Oklahoma and Texas essentially found out Big 12 TV contract was going to be the same thing that it was 12 years ago. So they're looking at this like, why would we sign on the dotted line for 10, 15 more years of being, X number of dollars, $20 million behind our peers in the SEC and the Big Ten. And I thought, well, if Oregon and USC look at what the Pac-12 TV contract winds up being, which I have my doubts that it's going to be much more than what it is right now, why would they not do the same thing and then look to join the Big Ten? But I know in talking to you, it is, again, much more complicated than that.
I think it really is. When you look at the money pieces, I think is really interesting because there's a big difference in like how the money is funded at a lot of these places. So first of all, if we think about the Pac-12, so there's sort of these two groups. I'm gonna kind of call this the Pac-5 because they're really similar. In it, I think of like particularly the California Four. Sit each other, like those old Westerns where like they all have like guns pointed at each other. That would be, USC and UCLA and Stanford and Berkeley in everything that they do, whether that is competing in football, whether that's sports, whether that's Olympic medals, whether it's Oscar winners among alumni, whether it's students for the school, whether it's donors, they are all competing against each other in everything that they do. They also, kind of funny. They also view like, they respect each other tremendously. Like they would hire each other's graduates in a minute, but they also do not want the other one to succeed. It's funny. I hear folks, particularly from the SEC, I hear the lower end of SEC schools like celebrate like Alabama's wins. No, Jonathan Smith, when he was rebuilding Oregon, never celebrated any of USC's wins. UCLA lost to Fresno and USC people cheered. It's sort of almost like the US and Russia in some ways. Like you respect them, you're economically integrated with them, you are not cheering for them to win. So you have these sort of cultural differences where they're really closely tied and really competing. But also, the athletics at a lot of these schools are a fraction of the impact of financially for these schools and a big chunk of the culture. So you think about like, what would it take for, these schools to pick up and leave? What would make it worth it? Well, you're looking at these, USC, and these are actually some inflation adjusted numbers. So they're, not necessarily on par with the regular reported numbers. But, Stanford's getting $1 billion a year in gifts. USC is getting $700 million a year. UCLA is getting $500 million a year. So, how many USC or UCLA or Stanford donors would say, oh, you're going to get $20 million a year to fly over here? Okay, I got 30 million that says that's a bad idea. And it would also be, the travel would be intolerable to professors, unless you're really talking about like a sort of end of the sports world cutoff where like you had to do this to survive. One of the things that I phenomenally respect about the Big 12 is Bob Bowlesby is a rock star in that when it was on the line for the conference's survival, he found the perfect solution and did it fast. And I think the Big 12 is stronger today than it was. And I think culturally, you look at those, just the charts we had on the culture fits, Texas does not really fit with the Big 12 as much. They don't necessarily fit with the SEC as much either. But Texas and Texas A&M and Texas A&M and Florida are kind of their own little SEC threesome that is very different as institutions than a lot of these other places. Alabama spends more on research than on sports. I mean, that would be like Penn having a $900 million or a $600 million sports budget. If you equated Alabama, what they do with research and what they do with sports. I mean, that's crazy. Michigan, I should do the numbers on this, would have like a $4 billion sports budget if that's what they were doing. And so it's just a different, it's just a different sort of values as what they're trying to do as institutions. And I thought that none of that was being reflected in some of the reporting. But was, I thought, kind of indirectly being reported in guys like you that are really tied into the schools and hearing like what was happening, what wasn't happening. but I thought that a lot of that was driven by what was going on at a higher level.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it all makes a ton of sense as far as that is concerned. What about the next round of realignment here for the Big 12? I mean, that's where a lot of people want to go with this and think about, Memphis and Boise. And I know you've brought both of those up already a little bit. Does it make the most sense to you that they would be likely candidates or sensical candidates? Or what about, we hear about, there's always like the Big 12 pipe dream of Arizona and Arizona State, right? That kind of a deal. Who do you think makes the most sense that the Big 12 is going to go with the next round of realignment?
Some of it would have to do with where the conferences were sort of moving to, and sort of what they were left with. You think about somewhere like Arizona and Arizona State. I mean, don't know their administrators, but the idea that they would uproot, everything that they have had for all this time and go to somewhere that was much more travel inconvenient, like it would have to be something really worth their while. You'd have to have like a lot of drama. When the Pac-10 was, or the Pac originally they called it the AAWU or whatever, but then they called themselves the Big Five, and then the Pac-8 when they added the next three was formed under a cloud of drama that is, could actually probably exceed the Southwest Conference. And if you have divisions like that, like you had at the time, you could maybe see something like that, but it would be hard to think about those schools wanting out unless you're talking about another like serious reorganization of the sport. But I can't imagine Arizona State wanting to go to Morgantown on a Tuesday for women's volleyball when their other option is the completely like brilliantly integrated airport and travel pairing setup that the Pac has. Like they'd have to be really mad about something. But think about like round two metrics, and this is sort of just looking at a couple of key metrics here, like of who was sort of like the available schools, if you would want to call them that. I just put, their indexed academic rank using the Wall Street Journal Times one, which I think is probably the best. And then looking at the 5-year football program rank from College Football News. It's an awesome study. If you guys haven't seen it, it's phenomenal. Kind of looking here at how these available schools match up with the Big 12 today. You can kind of see here, like the Big 12 best versus the bottom 25%. Like, who's worse than the Big 12 today and who's better than the Big 12, or right in the par. And this is where you kind of have to start to make decisions because nobody's perfect. You think about Boise versus Memphis. Nobody's perfect. You want to think about trajectory, like where are people trying to go? So two of the ones that we keep hearing a lot of is Boise and Memphis. And, we look at Boise and, again, Boise's academic and institutional metrics are not on par with the Big 12 today. But Boise is trying to be a rocket ship. Again, like I said, they've doubled their spending in research. All of their numbers are getting better, and they're rocketing up, and they're saying this is what we want to do. And I would guess, and I don't know this for sure, but I would guess if you're a high school kid in Idaho today, you're probably a lot more likely to want to go to Boise State over University of Idaho than you were 20 years ago. And that's what they want. So, like, I'm looking at schools that I want to join. You want schools that are on a rocket ship with you. Look at what Dr. Livingstone's doing with Baylor. Look at all the amazing stuff that she's done. Look at the controversies that she settled. Like that, you want schools that are doing that kind of stuff in your conference. Memphis is on a search for a new president. Kind of like K-State. So my guess would be the Big 12 is probably looking at Memphis and saying like, okay, we like a lot about what you're doing. You're not quite there as an institution. If you're looking at Northwestern, and I say this because Morty Shapiro was my freshman econ teacher and I love him. He's awesome. He's the president, but like whoever is the next president of Northwestern is going to be fine. But Memphis, they're probably going to want to be like, are we going to have a professor who's going to keep them on the trajectory that we want and make sure that they're going, where we want. When I looked at this is sort of the scoring. When I looked at the round one, I created kind of this whole metric, this formula, and kind of like try to actually say like, if we could assign one number, who would fit better in the Big 12 than other people today. Of those 8, again, BYU fit better than anybody. Then you look at some of the next ones. SDSU was close. But you think about like the travel and the actual logistics of it, like, do kids from Cincinnati want to do they, since this is the University of Cincinnati, which is a phenomenal university with so like a crazy amount of research stuff, is it okay for them to be going to San Diego for, men's golf? Maybe not.